Geek. Talking baseball every week. Cause the Gleeman and the Geek.
And welcome to Gleeman and the Geek, the almost there edition.
You've been saying that for like months. He's John Bonus of Twins Daily. I'm Aaron Gleeman of The Athletic.
That's right.
It's a season preview edition, is what it is, John.
Yes, we are.
And almost there.
Almost there.
Nothing says opening day right around the corner than basically the first big snowfall of the year in Minnesota.
Well, the truth is, opening day has already happened.
That's true. We watched it in Korea.
And we've had the first opening scandal.
That's right. Shohei Ohtani is interpreter. Which we might talk about here in a minute. But season preview, the Twins play, 6 days from today? Yeah.
Right.
We're recording this Friday morning. This is our last free show before baseball starts.
That's right.
Which is a great place to be.
And our next free show won't be for 2 more weeks.
Yeah.
Because I leave the next day after opening day, so we're not doing next Friday. We might be doing a quick Patreon or something, but we've got...
Yes, we will be doing... if you've been waiting to sign up for the Patreon, you don't have to wait anymore.
That's right.
Now it's just the season.
That's right.
We did a couple of in-depth previews, one on hitters, one on pitchers, that you can actually, if you sign up now, you get the whole archive for free, so you can go listen.
That's right. A lot of what we're going to touch on today, we could dive into much deeper.
I was thinking about, because we always do a big preview episode here, and it's always, I think, our most listened to episode of the year and all that. So this is, you can tell, we're wanting to make this quality. Mm-hmm. John's only coughed 4 times so far. John told me the other day he's fixed his cough.
No, I fixed a cough.
Yeah.
One of the coughs.
Okay. I was thinking about how would I, if an alien landed on Earth and was, for some reason, I'll stretch this analogy, interested in the Minnesota Twins. I don't know why. I'd probably tell him to be a Dodgers fan, and said what's been going on? What's with this? What's the story with this team?
Right.
And I thought, well, there's 2 ways you can kind of look at what's happened since we left Target Field with the playoff losses. One is that they have sliced $30 million off the payroll, and by they I mean ownership, not the front office.
Right. And
they've lost Sonny Gray, Kenta Maeda, Jorge Polanco. I don't know, toss Michael A. Taylor in there, key veterans.
Yeah.
4 of their most key veterans, including Gray, obviously was the biggest loss, the runner-up for the Cy Young last year. And
they are a worse team than they were when they off-season started.
Well, they have worse veterans, I would say. They don't project any worse.
No,
I'll say that.
That's interesting.
But which goes to my second point. But the other thing I would say on the heels of that is most of their moves to add pieces, those are the guys they've lost, and they've lost $30 million in payroll. 30 might be a little more, 31 million, have been kind of low wattage, more around the margins, more depth-based moves.
People they've added. Yes,
right.
Correct.
All the additions, whether trades, free agency, all that stuff, waiver wire pickups, obviously. But you can't really point to anyone. I mean, Carlos Santana used to be a star.
Right, sure.
But he's not a star now. You can't really point to anyone who's even at the caliber of Polanco or Maeda, let alone Sonny Gray, that they've added. Right. And so I think if you look at it that way, it's certainly been a frustrating / disappointing / underwhelming whatever offseason. I think that's true. But then the flip side, which we just kind of hinted at there, is I just wrote a thing for The Athletic, their AL Central previews coming out. So all the writers from the teams in the AL Central write little blurbs. And I looked at the other teams and I just thought, well, they very clearly... the star power of this team, the young talent that we saw step forward last year, and some young talent that's capable of stepping forward this year, which we'll talk more about it later on the show. And then the depth. I actually think under the circumstances of losing $30 million in payroll, they did a pretty good job of maintaining veteran depth. Yeah. Around the margins. Now, some injuries have taken a chunk out of that, which we're also going to talk about in a second.
But also, some injuries compared to how they ended the year last year. Right. Some injuries have had time to heal.
For sure.
That's where I think a lot.
Correa and Buxton.
Yeah, Correa and Buxton, and to some extent Royce Lewis, from where he was at the end of the year. And
so you can focus on, as we have at various points, the payroll going down 20%, which I find appalling, just from a fan perspective. You can focus on, well, they didn't really replace Sonny Gray, or
Right.
why did they trade this guy, or whatever it is. And you can focus on, well, what they really add. They added some relievers and a 38-year-old first baseman, and that's all true. But it's also true that this is very clearly the favorite in the American League Central, which was not true, by the way, this time last year.
Yep.
Cleveland was favored to win the AL Central.
Sure, but
last
this is loads better than it was at the same time last year.
Right. And so
The beginning of
how
the
do you
season.
balance that? Well, like we often like to say on this show, multiple things can be true.
Yeah, that's it.
And you look at, like I said, they're the favorites. We talked about this a couple weeks ago, but I double checked. So they're minus 125 to win the division, which means you have to bet $125 to win 100,
Right.
which means it's not even a 50-50
yeah,
bet.
that's right.
They're more than 50% to win the division.
Right.
All the other teams are at least 3-1, which means there isn't even really like this team is close to the Twins to win the division. People aren't even certain really if Cleveland or Detroit should be second.
Right.
We can talk about that. And you look at all the projections, and they're at somewhere between like 85 and 88 wins on almost any prominent projection system, whereas in a lot of projections, there isn't a second American League team with a winning record or even a 500 record.
Right.
And I look at like some specific projections and stuff like Fangraphs. Right now they have the number 2 projected rotation starting pitching in the American League, behind the Seattle Mariners, who we praised on the last show, or I praised on the last show, as having, to me, by far the best and deepest rotation. Well, the Twins are number 2, and that's the thing people have fretted about the most this offseason is you lost Sonny Gray and Kenta Maeda.
The strength is probably going to be the lineup. right.
And so they're number 2. Now, look, that's just one projection system, but it's one of the better projection systems. They were number 1 in relief pitching, in bullpen projection, except now they're going to be out or without Duran and Thielbar perhaps for most or all of April. So that's taken that down to number 3 in the American League, behind Houston and Tampa Bay, who have had great bullpens forever, basically. So you got the number 2 starting rotation, you got the number 3 bullpen, and the hitting, I was a little surprised that they only project to be 6th in the American League. Now, I don't think that's that far off. I probably think they have a chance to be top 5, but somewhere in the 4 to 8 range is probably where I'd put them. It's hard to project, as we talked about 2 episodes ago on the Patreon, because they were abysmal in the first half and they were the second best lineup in the American League in the second half.
Right.
Well, how do you blend those two together? Well, you blend them together. They're about 6th, basically. And so overall, they project to be the 4th best team in the American League. And so how do you weigh the frustrating aspects of the offseason and the talent, the veteran talent drain that is taking place versus the talent that still remains, the star power and upside that still remains, the young guys who can take another step forward, and the fact that some of the things that have been focused on, like losing Sonny Gray and not replacing him and all that stuff, yes, that makes them weaker, but it doesn't necessarily make them weak in those areas.
Sure, yeah.
So that's something that we've kind of, I felt like we've tried to kind of figure that out all off season.
Yeah.
And now we're here, and I still am not 100% sure kind of what I think of this team or what to make of this team as a whole, other than I think they are just very clearly the front runners in the American League Central. And that's not a super high bar, obviously. The American League Central is still
I think
terrible.
people are hoping for an actual postseason run or something like
that.
But
I would caution against, first of all, thinking you can predict anything about the playoffs, because they did something last year in the playoffs that they hadn't done 20 years. And I don't know that people were that confident about it. And there's no reason they can't do that and more this year. And the first path towards that is winning the American League Central. And the likelihood of being in a better position for the playoffs by dominating the division more is viable, but relatively slim.
Yeah, I agree.
Like,
it's probably still going to end up with 3rd place overall.
Correct. You're still going to end up as the 3rd seed, unless now the difference between winning 85 games and 90 games, or even 92 games, is a huge difference.
Could be,
but it's still going to put you in the third seed because the winners of the two other divisions are going to win 94, 95, sometimes 100 games, most likely.
It's hard to say.
It's not impossible, but
to be fair, they made a run at second best last year towards the end, as Texas, Houston, and Seattle ended up beating up in each other.
The West was much, much worse than people thought. The winner of the West,
right? Yeah.
And they still finished 5 games behind. Yeah. So what I mean by all that is, it's not that you shouldn't try to dominate the division and you shouldn't try to look ahead to the playoffs, but I think that's generally overblown in the sense, most likely, if the Twins are going to have a successful season, they're going to win the American League Central, they're going to get the third seed in the playoffs, and they're going to play the last wild card team, and they're going to host the entire 3-game series at home. That's precisely what happened last season, and if it's going to be a successful year, that's again by far the most likely scenario. And so that's those are the first boxes you need to check. And yes, if they had added a frontline starter now, you might feel better about their chances of making a deeper playoff run.
Right.
But you're fooling yourself if you think you can predict that. I mean, Sonny Gray's one of the ones who coughed up a playoff game.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
And so I think you have to sort of one foot in front of the other, at least 6 months out from the playoffs. And you can't make a run without making the playoffs.
Sure,
and you can't make a playoff. This is simple stuff, obviously. But I do think it's worth saying. And so I think they're in such a good position to have the same path ahead of them as they did last year. And if anything, probably a better position for the regular season than we thought at this time last year.
For sure.
And so
or by the middle of last year.
Yeah. And, and so as we get closer, as we've gotten closer to the season starting and further away from, the November reveal that the payroll was going to go down, that's sort of disappeared a little bit for me from the forefront. And obviously you just start looking ahead to games and it's like, there's no reason that this can't be a very fun, very successful next 6 months. And for me, at least, all you want is a ticket to the playoffs, to get let into that party, and then you just try to get hot.
Yeah, I mean, it was. You were kind of comparing to how things ended last year. Yeah. I think it's worth pointing out, like, it was very clear in spring training how much different it was than how things started last year.
Sure.
Last year, when with Buxton at DH and Royce Lewis nowhere near coming back,
Polanco on the IL,
Kirilloff
on the IL.
Like, we were we were excited about the potential of the rotation, right? But we had some questions about that as well. Sonny Gray hadn't been particularly healthy the year before,
and nobody knew Pablo Lopez was going to take a big step forward.
That's right.
And by the way, people were not hating on Pablo Lopez, but hating on the way they acquired him because they just traded a rise for him.
Yeah,
so
and there was a lot of discussion last year about could people step forward? What ended up happening is a bunch of guys took huge steps forward.
Yeah.
And over the last 2 episodes on the Patreon, we talked a lot about do we expect a further step forward from this player, or do we expect this person to regress a little bit, or what can we expect from a healthy Buxton?
What does that even mean for some of these guys? What is a healthy Buxton?
Especially as we talked about the lineup. I mean, pitching's always a huge question mark year to year. And when you talk about the lineup, there's so many guys that have such high ceilings, but also such low floors, or have injury-related floors.
Well, listen to this list. So I put together this list. Now, this is just – I'm not talking about prospects or anything like that. This is just guys who were going to be or are on the opening day roster.
Right.
And these are what I would describe as health question marks. Now, some of them are injured now as of 3 days ago. Buxton, obviously. I mean, you could take this clip and just put it in our 2025 preview.
Who, by the way, set out with a sore back earlier this week.
Yeah, but he's back. He was going to play today. Correa, obviously, played through a debilitating heel injury and had his worst season and is now said to be healthy, but we'll see. Royce Lewis, who has played a grand total of like 75 games in the majors. For all as great as he's been, he's missed like 75% of the last 4 years, basically, because of injuries, significant injuries. Alex Kirilloff, who has each of his last 3 seasons have ended with a surgery.
Sure.
Chris Paddock, who's coming back from a second Tommy John.
Correct.
Brock Stewart, who, as amazing as he was last year with a 0-something ERA, missed 2 months right in the middle of the season and
after
came back.
coming back from a Tommy John.
Right, after coming back from Tommy John surgery. Jorge Alcala, who looks great in camp and may win one of the last, probably will now with the injuries, win one of the last bullpen spots, but he's basically been injured for the past 2 years. Right. Josh Staumont, coming over from the Royals as a low-cost reclamation project free agent. He's been back-to-back seasons wrecked by injuries. He's coming back from one of the worst surgeries you can get, which is thoracic outlet syndrome surgery. And then, on top of that, as of 60 hours ago or whatever, you add 3 names to that list, unfortunately, right. Which is Johan Duran, right. That is a huge loss, even right. if it's only for a month, out with an oblique strain, which those things tend to linger. They can be unpredictable. I certainly wouldn't count on seeing him before May. Anything before that, I think, would be...
And they'll certainly be cautious with it, because
right.
they care about having him a lot more in September and October than...
As a guy who throws 104 miles an hour, you tend to use it. Yeah. It's not like me and John. We could go without an oblique for a while, probably. For all I know, I've had an oblique strain for 20 years. Hasn't affected a damn thing. Yeah. Caleb Thielbar, who was probably, fourth in line in their bullpen, the top lefty in their bullpen, certainly, and he's now going to miss opening day and beyond with a hamstring injury. And then Anthony DeSclafani, who was lined up to be the number 5 starter, is out for opening day and sounds like might just have a surgery and never throw a pitch in a Twins uniform because of elbow problems that have stemmed since last year. And so you look at all those health question marks, and especially the 3 guys, Duran, Thielbar, and DeSclafani, who are actually hurt now.
Right.
The other guys, none of them are hurt before that. The other, 8 guys I mentioned. They're currently
right.
healthy.
Yes.
But there is just such a level of question regarding their health that it's hard to even sort of, fathom what it will look like until you see it.
Right.
What will it look like for a healthy Buxton? I don't know. We've never seen it, basically.
Beyond that, you've got things like, Jeffers and Vasquez both staying healthy for the entirety of last year.
Right.
That never happens for catchers. You've got other performance-related stuff, like is Max Kepler the guy who was in the first half of the season or the second half of the season?
So there are a lot of questions within that. I think especially the health-related ones are just so difficult to even attempt to answer. You're almost like fooling yourself.
Right.
Even the Twins trainers probably are fooling themselves that they really think they have a great answer for how it's going to go. But like you said, the spectrum of results just from that 10 names or whatever that I listed there.
Sure.
Just based purely on injury, let alone performance, which has its own, spectrum of results,
right.
is so huge that it's probably the difference between, running away with the AL Central and being one of the top 2 seeds and getting a bye versus finishing second or third. Right. And so how do you analyze that? Well, you don't really. You kind of try
play the games, which is what we're
right,
start doing.
Which I'm excited to do.
Yeah,
yes,
right.
I'm excited for them to do. They're not going to let me play this year. I asked them again. Yeah. They said, "What would you do?" Full-time DH, but I need someone to run for me, and I don't mean when I get on base. When I was a kid,
out of the box.
Yeah, when I was a kid at my elementary school, we used to play once a year. The kids would play kickball against the teachers, and our principal, Dr. Bennett, was a fat guy,
okay.
50-year-old fat guy, a Gleeman type, And he would always he would take his at bat in the first inning, and he would successfully kick the ball, and he had hired or signed a kid from our team to stand in a sprinter stance, with your one leg down and your fingers on the ground, and as soon as he made contact, the kid would just sprint to first base for him, and that's what I would need if I were a DH. But I'm available for that. John could be my runner, maybe. You do a lot of running, John.
Not fast running.
No, but faster than me.
You might want to go back to that mascot race video just to see where I was finishing.
Well, you did get to the finish line.
I did make it to the finish line.
Yes. Well, I'm about to become even slower on Wednesday. I'm having a hip thing happen, so we'll see how that goes. So, I might be on the 60-day IL too, which is fitting. Even the people who cover the Twins.
Sure.
That's on the 60-day IL. So that's kind of the, 10,000-foot view, or at least my 10,000-foot view of the team. But I looked up something that I think puts into context what I mean when I say the star power or the upside is so above and beyond the rest of the division. So I looked up Fangraphs projections again, and I looked at the top 50 position players in terms of projected WAR, wins above replacement, in the American League, and the top 50 pitchers. So there's 15 teams. So you're talking about each team should have three to four guys in both groups. Okay. Top 50 hitters in the American League. It's like, Judge, Soto, Yordan Alvarez, and then you start to get to them. Whatever. The Twins have 4 of the top 50 hitters. You can probably name them in your head. The Twins have 5 of the top 50 hitters, that's really good.
That's above, yeah.
I mean,
that's good.
Cleveland is next in the division with 3.
Okay.
And then Detroit, Kansas City, and Chicago each have 1 of the top 50 hitters.
That sounds about right.
Wow. Yeah. Then you
I'm
go.
surprised Cleveland has 3, to be honest with you.
Well, it's Ramirez and Jimenez. They're infield duo.
All right.
And then I think
I wouldn't have given you. I wouldn't know. Okay.
Stephen Kwan, I think.
Okay.
Pitchers, top 50 pitchers. The Twins have 4 of the top 50 pitchers, which again is above average.
Sure.
And that's not even counting Duran because he's a reliever, so his WAR isn't going to be that big anyway, and they took a chunk out of his projection because he's injured now. Okay. Those are all starters. Cleveland also has 4, which isn't shocking that their pitching would be relatively strong. Detroit, though, has 1 of the top 50 pitchers in the American League, and it's Skubal, who I'm a huge fan of Skubal.
Sure.
But this maybe slows down some of that.
Mike Kenta didn't make it to the top 50.
No, Kenta did not. I don't know that he's projected for that many innings, probably. Kansas City has 2 of the top 50 pitchers. Okay. And the White Sox have 1 of the top 50 pitchers. So in some of these cases, in both hitting and pitching, the Twins are as good or on the hitting side solidly better than Cleveland. And then in both cases, the Twins have sort of as much high-end or star power for both hitting and pitching as the bottom 3 teams in the division combined or more.
Yeah, that's right.
And so I think that you can lose sight of, I don't know, when you're just left with nothing, with no games for 6 months, you start to sort of invent things of interest. And for a few weeks, it seemed like everyone was talking up the Royals. Right. And then everyone was talking up Detroit. Right. And then everyone's trying to reconvince themselves that Cleveland's dangerous. And I'm not saying these things are impossible. But I do think if you're just the favorite and you ended last season as the division champions and you made a little playoff run and you're going to begin this season as the division frontrunners and favorites, it's hard to maintain everyone seeing that and thinking that and focusing on that for 4 months or 5 months. Right. You don't have the attention span. It's like you need keys jingled in, in front of you if you're an animal or whatever. Right. At some point, no one just wants to spend the whole offseason going, well, the Twins are favored.
We're not paying enough attention for the forest for the trees.
I think that's part of it. And maybe that's an optimistic view of it. We'll see. I mean, maybe Detroit is ready to surge ahead, and maybe all the projections are wrong and all that.
Maybe Cleveland will hit this year.
Right. I mean, it's certainly possible. So, that's how I view things overall. We're going to go through now. We can either start pitching or start hitting. You can decide. Maybe we'll flip it and we'll start pitching.
But there's a lot of news around the pitching, too, that we should cover.
But first,
let's talk a little bit about Soda Stick, our first sponsor. Opening day, you will be at Forgotten Star. You won't, but I will be at Forgotten Star. I think our listeners will be at Forgotten Star having a beer, and they will be able to buy some Soda Stick gear. But you can always buy Soda Stick gear. You're going to be able to buy because they're going to have a booth there. They're going to be selling stuff there. They're going to be giving away some of the raffle prizes that we win because they often do that at our Winter Meltdown events.
Or you can just go to sodastickco.com.
Well, that would be the easy way.
Google
to do it.
Soda, like Minnesota, Soda Stick, and tons of new baseball stuff.
That's right.
And then they also have other sports too. I always defy anyone. Right. I've experienced this myself. To go to sodastickco.com, Sodastick's website, and spend 90 seconds looking at their products and not want to buy one.
Yeah, that's right. Just scroll down the front page, and you're going to come with like category after category.
Guarantee
after
you see something that you want.
Right. It's always going to be clever. It's always going to be Minnesota based. I've got a very local element to it. The local company.
I saw someone the other day wearing a Tony Oliva hitting school
there you
shirt.
Go.
And
I saw the Wiener Winner T-shirt in the wild the other day.
When you were looking in the mirror?
No, I often wear that. Okay. You're correct.
You can use the promo code Gleeman also, Gleeman, for 15% off. Right. It's funny. I always say how to spell my name. But if they're listening to this, they can probably just look at their phone and see it's the name of the podcast.
That's it.
Who knows? SodaStick, sodastickco.com. Our next sponsor is RotoWire.
That's right.
And
fantasy baseball drafts are this weekend.
If you haven't done it already, you're about to do it very soon.
That's right.
Your drafts.
It did not used to be that way. It used to be like when I was
When I was
first
a kid.
came out, the late 80s, early 90s, when we were tracking this stuff based on a baseball weekly, USA
writing
Today
on
baseball
parchment and
when you'd pour through the baseball weekly stats to be able to figure out how your team did.
Yeah.
Because the rules were so tight, you end up having to do it after the season started. It was traditionally the weekend after the season started because you weren't able to draft people that weren't on a roster, and you didn't know what the rosters were set at that time. It's loosened up now a lot. But I'm guessing the vast majority either have had their draft or are having their draft this weekend. If you want to do well, what I would just say is get a subscription to RotoWire. Check it out. You get 48 hours free. You don't even need to use
completely free. And I will stress this.
Yeah.
Here's how you know it is risk-free 48-hour, 2-day trial to RotoWire. They don't even ask for your credit card.
All right, yeah, that's right.
And I would absolutely recommend this. You can sign up for the 2-day free trial, do 12 fantasy drafts, and then just end the free trial. They're fine with that because here's what they know. They have a good product.
That's right, yeah.
You and I have both used the product for years and years, but long before they became sponsors of ours.
25 years I've used that product.
And they want you to look at the product because it's a great product. They have not only customizable cheat sheets and rankings and everything that you want to use for your draft and good analysis too, but they have a player news database that goes back decades that even if you're not a fantasy player and you're just, let's say, a writer or a fan, and you want to look up how long ago was this guy injured, what happened when he was traded, you can go back and basically get a recap, a step-by-step recap of an entire guy's career.
Well, and then throughout the season, they will judge, what does this injury mean to you? Or they will tell you, who are some waiver wire pickups you might pick up if someone got injured, something like that.
So just go to RotoWire, ROTOWIRE, RotoWire.com/Gleeman, and you just get a totally free trial for 2 days. Do your fantasy drafts with it.
That's right.
Okay. All right. So we're doing hitting or pitching?
We're doing pitching.
Okay.
'Cause that's where the news is coming. Let's start with the news.
Yeah, the news, we mentioned it, but Duran, who has struggled this spring, so I'm always curious if that's related, but he was throwing a live bullpen session on Sunday in Fort Myers and tweaked his oblique muscle and shut it down, and they were hoping for better, but then it took an MRI, and he's been diagnosed with a moderate, which means medium, I guess, not mild, moderate right oblique strain. And it's basically, if you've ever had kind of pulled something in your side,
right,
and you're like, is my ribs injured? Is my what? It's that. And it's become a more common, I would say over the last 5 years, some people, like old school baseball fans, be like, I never heard of oblique before that. Well, yeah, they used to be like, his side is sore. Now it's an oblique injury. Yeah. The problem with those is that you don't realize how much you rely on that muscle.
Right.
This is Dr. Gleeman talking.
The whole reason core training has become so popular is because we've started to recognize how often people lean into those muscles.
Right. Obviously, for hitters, you're getting
twisting
into a corkscrew every time you swing, basically.
Pitching too.
And pitching to some extent too. So, in general, Royce Lewis had an oblique strain last year.
Yeah, that's right.
And missed a month.
Yeah, right.
A little more than a month maybe. And he came back relatively soon, I would say. For a moderate one, I think a month is usually a fair, baseline for that. And so he suffered it, what did he suffer? 2 days ago, 3 days ago, or whatever. So maybe you can come back near the tail end of April. Right. But again, those are tricky to diagnose, I think, or to, predict, I should say. In his absence, that takes a huge chunk out of the bullpen value. He's not only is he their best reliever, he's arguably, top 3 reliever in all of baseball.
You take out the top guy, everybody has to move up a step. Right. Now, they've got some pretty good options to move up a step.
I would expect...
Partly because they did a good job of building a bullpen this offseason.
Some combination of Brock Stewart and Griffin Jacks to fill the closer role or the ninth inning role. In terms of who gets that chance, it wouldn't surprise me if they alternated. We talked on the Patreon. I personally would go with Brock Stewart. I think he's just better, probably, although I'm a big Griffin Jacks believer. But he's for sure less durable or you're less able
flexible.
to right. You're less able to use him wherever and whenever, and then bring him back the next day and do it again, or 3 games out of 4. Whereas Griffin Jax has proven to have something of a rubber arm. Well, Brock Stewart does not have a rubber arm. Brock Stewart, if you pitch him 20 pitches on a Monday, he's probably not going to pitch on Tuesday. And it's easier to lock someone like that into a kind of rigid role of you're only pitching the 9th inning if we're up 1, 2, or 3 runs.
Right. Yeah,
and the odds of needing a closer back-to-back days, obviously you'd be thrilled to need a closer as many days as possible.
Sure.
But you're more likely to just get into a spot where you're like, it's the 7th inning, there's 2 guys on base, it's a tie game, let's use someone here. You want Griffin Jax available for that, whereas Stewart wouldn't be available for that as often anyway.
Yeah, closers you can often treat a little more like a thoroughbred, a little more gently than you can sort of the 8th inning person who has to come in and handle things.
Right. Plus, I think it's probably not a bad thing that Brock Stewart can plan ahead a little and know the timing of his appearances more, as opposed to calling down to the bullpen and going, we're in a jam here, get ready. Yeah. So I think Griffin Jax is probably a little bit more capable physically of doing that. Both of those guys are certainly capable of filling for a month a closer role.
Right.
But
and the other one can take care of the 8th inning.
Right.
Yeah.
But as you said, the real danger here is, yes, you're missing Duran, but you're also, the strength of this pitching staff maybe was going to be bullpen depth.
Right.
But now, instead of being a strength, it's just sort of a necessity.
Right.
Because everyone has to go up a role here or up a level here, and you're removing the best of the best from the top. And now, instead of going, well, man, Griffin Jax is a hell of a number 3 guy, well, now he might be the closer or the number 2 guy. And instead of saying Justin Topa is a hell of a number 5 guy, well, he might be pitching the 7th inning for you now. You don't have Theobar either because, as we said, he's got a hamstring injury that he suffered pretty early in camp and never did end up pitching in a game.
Right.
Tried some live BP over the weekend and came out of it not feeling good enough to go. Yeah. You know that it's not going to be a super short-term stint on the IL when they shut him down and say they're putting him on the IL 10 days before opening day. Right. If there was a chance of Theobar pitching the first week or so of the season, there would be no reason to announce 10 days out that he's going on the IL. And then lastly, DeSclafani, which I wrote about that this morning, just the sort of...
have we got an official word on what's going on with him yet?
He's going, he's having his elbow looked at, but the Twins are not expecting good news. That's what I was told. I'm not. Well, obviously, we're not in Florida, so we don't know. But I was just told the expectation is the news will not be positive or good. He's starting the year on the IL, but I think there's a decent chance we never see him throw a pitch in a Twins uniform. Which, we talked about it at the time of the trade. He was, at best the 3rd piece out of 4, and probably realistically the 4th piece out of 4 from the Twins' point of view, coming from Seattle in the Polanco trade. Sure. The whole reason they acquired him, it all goes back to the payroll situation, basically. They didn't have any money to spend. And they thought, how are we going to fill the 5th starter role with a veteran?
For $5 million or
for
$4 million.
Nothing.
Right, yeah, right.
And so Seattle and San Francisco paid down 2/3 of his $12 million salary, so the Twins only had to pay $4 million. And then they kind of viewed it, or at least I viewed it, as like signing him to a 1-year, $4 million deal. Right. Now, is he the free agent I would have targeted and called at midnight on day 1 of the offseason? No. But what else are you going to get for $4 million in free agent pitching? Now, it turns out, if you waited another 3 months, you could have got Michael Lorenzen for $4.5 million,
that's probably true.
Which I wrote about this morning. But the whole point with these...
listen, I know they were talking to Lorenzen as recently as a month ago.
Right, it's similar to Michael A. Taylor.
Right.
In that Michael A. Taylor...
also may have signed since we last did the free show.
Maybe. Signed a 1-year, $4 million deal with the Pirates. And you say, well, that's the identical money that they're going to be paying his replacement, Manuel Margot, who they traded for a month ago from the Dodgers. Why wouldn't they have just given Michael A. Taylor that money and not screwed around and not needed to trade prospects and all this stuff? And it's like, well, they offered Michael A. Taylor that and more several times throughout the offseason.
Right.
The last time they offered him, and I've confirmed this with multiple Twin sources, and I'm sure John could probably say the same, they offered him what they view as substantially more than $4 million last time they talked.
Yeah, I don't know that it was a formal offer, but yes, they absolutely had discussions. It was more money than that. Yes.
And he said, no, And at that point,
and set an expectation that of a much higher amount.
Right.
Yes.
To the point that they're like, okay, we got to pivot here. We got to move on.
This is not going to happen.
And that's when they traded for Margot. And I think the Lorenzen thing is similar in the sense that you can say, well, if they hadn't a trade, you could have done the Seattle trade without DeSclafani.
Right.
I mean, he was probably just a neutral value from both sides, or honestly, Seattle might have viewed it as dumping a little bit of money. You certainly could have constructed a trade without DeSclafani. Maybe you get something else in return. Maybe it's just a 3-for-1, whatever the case. You'd have $4 million there because that's what he's costing them. Well, yeah, if you knew in hindsight that Lorenzen was going to sign for $4.5 million yesterday, you could have just tossed in another. Probably would have taken you $5 million to get him away from the Rangers, let's say. But you could have signed him. But they didn't know that hindsight. It certainly. No one predicted that Michael Lorenzen or anybody of that caliber.
No, they might have been interested in talking to Lorenzen about for the last month when DeSclafani was.
Yes, but I think this is again where the payroll comes into play.
I agree.
Even today, with DeSclafani looking like he's probably or more likely than not going to miss the entire season or at least have surgery of some kind. Right. Well, you go, well, why couldn't they knew that before Lorenzen signed? Right. Why wasn't their response to that news giving $5 million to Michael Lorenzen?
Right.
And I have an easy answer for you. They don't got $5 million. And I mean the front office, not ownership. The ownership's got $5 million. I'm pretty convinced of that. They could have given him $1 billion and they'd still be all right. And that's, the only reason they messed with DeSclafani in the first place was ultimately because they didn't have any payroll room. And now the only reason that they don't turn around and sign a Lorenzen or a Clevenger or a whoever,
Montgomery.
well, let alone Montgomery, Blake Snell and all that, is because of the payroll. They don't have any money. And so you push the front office. It's easy to say, well, the payroll's down $30 million when like Blake Snell signs for $30 million. You go, well, it cost them Blake Snell. Well, I don't necessarily think that's the case. But it's very easy to connect the dots realistically and say, some of these low wattage moves didn't have to be so low wattage. Right. They could have just given Michael A. Taylor $7 million instead of trading for Manuel Margot. Right. Now, maybe Margot will outplay Taylor. We don't know. Right. They could have not messed around with DeSclafani at all and just signed a Lorenzen type or someone even maybe a little bit better than that 3 months ago if they had an extra $10 million to spend. And even now, they could respond to DeSclafani being out by spending another $5 million or $8 million to fill that spot. Right. But they don't have the money to do that. Now, even within that, much like how Margot can outplay Taylor, theoretically, I'd say that's about a coin flip, honestly.
Right, yeah.
Louis Varland might outpitch all those guys as the fifth spot. It's not, they didn't add DeSclafani because they lacked faith in Louis Varland. It was because they lacked faith in the options after Louis Varland.
Right,
and now we're going to see that. Now Louis Varland, who, by the way, not great timing by Louis. The day after he's basically handed the fifth spot, he went out and gave up like 400 runs.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Not great. Although stuff-wise, he looked fine. But a lot of singles. Just single after single against the Tigers. But he's perfectly capable of being a solid fifth starter and better than that.
Right.
But the question is, well, who's the sixth starter now?
Right, that's right.
Who's the seventh starter now? Who's the eighth starter now?
And it could be. I mean, one of the things we talked about a little bit on the Patreon was, it could be in part they have greater faith now in some of the options behind Louis Varland after watching.
I guess.
Watching. I don't know. Simeon Woods Richardson or watching. Cantorino also went on the IL, so
he's not going to be counted on at any point. I mean, I would guess there in some order the 6, 7, 8, which by the way, last year. 6 was Bailey Ober at AAA.
Right, yeah. Right.
7 was Louis Varland.
Right.
And they needed both those guys and more to the point that they signed Dallas Keuchel in the middle of the season.
That's right. Yeah, you're right.
The washed up remains of Dallas Keuchel, who's still unsigned, by the way. They could add him to AAA. Wouldn't be the worst idea. I liked chatting with Dallas Keuchel, and he had several very good starts.
Yeah.
Several very bad starts, too. But so now the 6, 7, 8 at AAA
are some combination of Simeon Woods Richardson, Festa, and Hedrick.
Right.
I think. Yeah.
And I'm not going to sit here and denigrate those guys' futures.
No.
Festa is, to me, their best pitching prospect and is probably very close to being MLB ready to the extent that he's, can be a mid-rotation type of starter with some upside beyond that. And like you said, Simeon Woods Richardson, after a very bad year at AAA where his velocity was down and his prospect stock dropped, showed up to spring training, worked on his mechanics, smoothed things out, and was throwing 92 to 94 again, like they had hoped.
Well, even Brent Hedrick, like I think this time 2 years ago, he was an A-ball, and he's already he keeps a fairly fast riser. Now we've seen enough of him not to get
not
too
super
carried
high
away with
upside,
that.
but I think as a fifth starter, a guy who can make 10, 15 starts for you in a season, absolutely.
Right.
It's not individually that I have any issue with those guys, and I think by mid-season, the notion of turning a rotation spot over to one or both of Festa and Simeon Woods-Richardson should be appealing to people, not scary to people. But on day one, or 3 weeks in, because last year, Ober, much was made of him starting the season at AAA. 3 weeks later, he was in the rotation, and he made 26 starts for them.
And he threw 171.1 innings.
They're going to need starters. It would be so amazing to think and know we got this 5-man rotation. Varland's the fifth guy. We're good. They're each going to make 30-something starts, and we'll get to the end. No, that ain't going to happen. You're not even going to make it through April. Right. Not because of them individually, but that's just how pitching goes. And so that has become, I would say, the Duran injury and the domino effect with Theobar and the rest of the rotation is worrisome, I think, because we've seen what can happen when a bullpen kind of unravels early in a season. It can stop you from ever being on track in a season, essentially. And so that's a worry. But to me, the biggest kind of, when you look at this roster or you look at the depth charts or you look at the projections or just, gut feel, the rotation depth is, to me, the scariest. What happens if two guys get hurt? All of a sudden you're starting twice every 5 days, Simeon Woods-Richardson and Brent Hedrick early in the season. That's just not, it's not close to where you want to be early in the season. Now, hopefully everyone stays healthy, but
if you take a look at the 5 people that came out of the starting rotation this year out of spring training last year.
Yeah.
44 games were started by other people.
Yeah, basically almost a third. Over a quarter of the season.
Right, yeah. One and a half starting pitchers worth was
full spots in the rotation. Right. Yeah, I mean, like I said, Ober made 26, Varland made double digits, and they used Keuchel for 6, and then there were a couple of spot starts. Right. Simeon Woods-Richardson made a spot start. I know. You're going to need realistically 8 probably guys make 5 or more starts. At least 7, probably 8. There are some years when you need 10. Right. And so the fact that Louis Varland is a good option to be now the 5th guy, that's great. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't begin to solve the whole problem that's going to present itself over the course of 6 months and 162 games. But I'm a believer in Varland. I think he works his ass off. I think he's smart. I think the raw stuff has gotten to a point where it's above average in the major leagues. The question with him is just sort of refining his non-fastball, working on pitch mix, working on consistency and all that stuff. You look at the rest of the rotation.
Keeping right-handers in check, oddly enough.
Yeah, it's weird. Obviously, they need Pablo Lopez to be Pablo Lopez that we saw last year, or better.
Yeah. Saw in the second half of last year.
I mean, he was great to begin with.
You're right. April, he was very good as well.
Had a 1-something ERA. I mean, he was certainly a top dozen starting pitcher in Major League Baseball last year. Right. I would expect something similar. There's no reason not to expect that. He's still in his 20s. He was healthy. He's smart as hell. The stuff has played up with the Twins. Yeah. Added the sweeper to great effect. That is, to me, I don't want to say he's underrated, but the effect of having a true number 1 starter at the front of the rotation is so foreign to the Twins since Johan Santana, 20 years basically, that it's almost like I feel like it can be underrated as an overall effect for the rotation. Like you go, okay, they got a good guy at the top and Lopez, then, gets a little shit. Well, it's not just a good guy at the top. Right. This isn't just like, Scott Baker or even Irvin Santana, who was quite good for them for a year or two. But this is potentially a Cy Young caliber guy. Now, they got a runner-up finish from Sonny Gray last year. Right, it's going to be hard for Lopez to be any better than Sonny Gray was last year. But also, it's going to be hard for Sonny Gray to be that good, too.
That's true.
So that's the biggest key. But then I would say beyond Lopez, in the season, but especially as they get towards October, they need one of, I'll throw Varland into this mix too, but one of Ryan, Ober, and Paddock to step forward and stay healthy and make 25-plus starts and then cross the finish line into October in position to be a number 2, game 2 starter. Right. And not like we saw with Ryan and Ober last year where they're starting a game, but they're pulled after going through once because there's no faith in them. Right. We need 5 innings. That's what you need in a playoff game at this point. And that, to me, is the biggest question. Now, in fairness, Sonny Gray shot 50% on that last year.
Fair. Yep.
After a runner-up Cy Young finish. He certainly did the job against Toronto as the number 2 starter, and then did not do the job against Houston at all. Yeah. And that's why trying to predict what's going to happen so far in advance of the playoffs is impossible.
Yeah, I mean, of the storylines that are going to come out of the season, other than wins, losses, how they do in the AL Central stuff, the stuff that we obsess about, I think one of the bigger storylines is going to be like, can one of those 3 guys take a significant step forward?
Yes.
I mean, the truth is, I feel like several of those guys are kind of right on the edge.
I think
right
they're
now.
all capable, and that's why I'll even throw Varland in there. Like, it wouldn't shock me if he did either.
Right.
But you just need it to happen, and realistically, you'd want 2 of them to do it.
Well, that's
the problem you ran into last year. Is you had faith in Lopez and Gray, and they, by the end of the last year, rightly or wrongly, they had no faith in anybody else, to the point that they pushed Joe Ryan back multiple times.
Right.
Then they used Ober ahead of him, but really only let him go through the lineup once. And then when they were finally just forced to use Ryan, they did the same thing with him, where it was like he was just on constant pull watch, basically. Well, you can't do that again. Or you can't do that with every spot in your rotation other than Lopez. So that is the big storyline. And the truth is, if 1 or 2 out of those 4 guys, well, and hell, it could be David Festa.
Right.
I mean, you don't know. If 1 or 2 of those guys step forward to be a solid playoff caliber, which to me is a number 2 or number 3 starter, I would call those playoff caliber. That's good for the playoffs, but it's also going to mean you're going to have a successful regular season too. And so that's why it's the goal, but it's also the path forward. Like they need that. They need Joe Ryan to pitch like he did in the first half, not the second half.
Yeah, we saw both of those players take big steps forward. Joe Ryan in the first half, and not a huge step backwards in the second half, right? And Bailey Ober take, the big question about Bailey Ober coming into last year was, is he durable? Can he throw? Can he stay healthy? And then also, can he, if he does stay healthy, can he throw 150 innings? He ends up throwing 171 innings.
And I feel like the skepticism around that was it almost like didn't match the actual performance.
Right. Yeah.
Because did he have a couple of stints in August or whatever where he had 3 not great starts, but he hardly got knocked around like Joe Ryan did. He finished with a 3.5 ERA, and he threw 170 total innings between AAA and the majors.
And postseason.
and postseason. And even when they got to the postseason, they had really no faith in him. And so he needs to, unfortunately, convince them to have faith in him. It's difficult, I guess. And then obviously Paddock, who they have a ton of optimism surrounding, and Twins fans got a glimpse of the type of stuff he had out of the bullpen in September of last year.
A lot of that optimism is based on that glimpse.
Sure. Yeah. But even as a starter, he threw in a minor league game the other day. He's going to be 93 to 95 with the fastball. His changeup has been a career-making great pitch forever for him. And he's got a kind of a fringy curveball, and now he's working on more of a sweeping slider to go east-west versus the north-south of the fastball changeup. But with him, second Tommy John surgery, and he's since his rookie year in San Diego, he's never really been a 100+ inning guy.
Right.
It's just a matter of, the stuff is there, but can he command it consistently? Can he go 5+ innings per start, and then even more than that, can he do it 25 times? Yeah. And can he do it 25 times successfully?
Right.
And do it so that on October 1st. He's not completely out of gas, or he's not on the IL. And that's the question. And then Varland, I would also put in that mix as being capable of stepping forward. And I would put Festa in that mix too. Realistically. They need that. And if they don't get that, and if they enter, July, and none of those guys have taken a step forward, or there's been injuries or some combination of that, then my question becomes, are they going to try to pursue a frontline starter in trade, which hasn't always worked out great for them at midseason, the Tyler Mahle one being the prime example of working out poorly? And then my question, even within that, is, do they have any money for that?
Right, that's right. Yeah.
Or is ownership not going to approve adding even like a $6 million salary or whatever? Because someone making a $15 million salary at the trade deadline will be owed like $6 million, like 40% of it or whatever. And so that's a question. I think, would would Jordan Montgomery look amazing at the number 2 spot in this rotation right now? Think of all the things we've talked about and all the questions we've had. Slotting him into that number 2 spot right now
solves a ton of problems.
Would answer all of it.
Yep.
Now, you still need to get to the finish line and all that, but then it's like, all right, you got Lopez. Game 2, you got Montgomery, and then you just need Ober, Ryan, Paddock, Varland, one of them to be game 3,
That's right.
and you got a playoff rotation there.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, and by the way, if you had $30 million more in payroll, you could sign Jordan Montgomery. I'm pretty confident today. You could have signed Blake Snell last
or
week,
at least
too.
The day after opening day.
Yeah, well, he's really running.
That's it. I mean, have you heard why he might be waiting until after opening day to sign him?
No.
If he signs after opening day, then he's not on somebody's roster for a full year, which means they can't give him the qualifying offer. He doesn't have the qualifying offer right now, but he's not ever received a qualifying offer. So if he signs with somebody now, literally like a couple days before opening day, they can attach a qualifying offer to him and hurt his chances next year.
That's
Whereas if he
interesting.
waits until after opening day,
Although he can also just put it in his contract that you can't give him the qualifying offer if you wanted to.
maybe.
We've seen that before. But yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. Well, that's fine with me. They don't need a fifth starter for 3 weeks
that's
anyway.
fine. Yeah, that's right.
No, it's not going to happen. But it should. That's what missing $30 million does. We've talked about. Let's see. There was one other thing. So yeah, I mean, I would say, in general, I would sort of caution against assuming that because they lost Gray and Maeda and didn't quote unquote replace them with anybody knows
Right.
that the rotation is somehow bad. Because I think that if Sonny Gray never would have been a Twin, and this was the current pitching staff, or especially the rotation, with Lopez at the top, and Ryan and Ober and Paddock in the 2 through 4 spots, and Louis Varland in the 5 spot, I think a lot more people would be like, this is a pretty good rotation, especially within the context of recent Twins history. It's a very good rotation.
Yeah, right.
Now, that's, again, not the highest bar. And so I would caution against letting the specter of Sonny Gray devalue the group that exists now. Yeah. But with that said, they're essentially counting on Paddock to replace Sonny Gray.
They're definitely a lot thinner than they were last year.
Yes, well, that's what I'm genuinely worried about, the 6 through 10.
Yeah, right.
But the top 5, I'm not that worried about.
Yeah,
like,
right.
I mean, I'm always worried about starting pitching.
Sure, right. Because starting pitching is always worth worrying about.
But yeah, I mean, to me, yes. Would you feel better with a more established number 2 starter? Absolutely. But the first half version of Joe Ryan, and really statistically, the overall version of Bailey Ober has been a number 2 caliber pitcher, even if there isn't that level of faith in them. Yeah. And, from a 3, 4, 5, and certainly 1 in the rotation, you look pretty good on paper, at least. Okay, so that's where the pitching staff stands. I wouldn't expect them to, what were they, second in the American League in ERA last year?
That, yeah.
But I would expect them to be top 5, certainly, overall. I think it would be disappointing. It would be unsuccessful if they dropped out of the top 5 in the American League in ERA.
I agree.
Before we switch to hitting, let's talk about our last couple of sponsors here.
Starting with BetterHelp. BetterHelp is a service that when you get to the point where you are ready for some therapy, and when you made that decision, when you've crossed, that could be the biggest obstacle of all, is just recognizing that you're ready to go forward and talk to somebody about some stuff. But then you don't even think about all the obstacles that come in after that. Like, who do I talk to? Am I going to be talking to a person?
How long do I have to wait? How long is there an opening?
Do I have to drive over there? Like,
and it stinks if any of those obstacles stop you from getting help.
Right.
And the beautiful part about BetterHelp is they can set you up with a real licensed therapist, typically within 2 or 3 days. Right. And they can also tailor it to whatever you're comfortable with. So if you want to do a video chat, you can do a video chat. If you don't want to be on camera, you can do a phone call. If you're like me and you hate being on the phone, you just type with someone and do a live chat. They will tailor it to whatever your comfort level and whatever your needs are. And our listeners can get 10% off their first month at BetterHelp by going to BetterHelp.com/Gleeman. That's BetterHelp, H-E-L-P. BetterHelp.com/Gleeman. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp.
That's right.
And then last sponsor.
Yeah. As we got up early this morning, to
hatch.
to record this
I wonder if
podcast.
that's why you're hatching from an egg.
Oh, that's
you're
I suppose
rising
so.
from a.
That's a good one.
That's not what I look like when I wake up.
No, you do not look like a baby chick.
Yeah, but Hatch. Here's how Hatch works. So they got various devices, and they kind of look like a new age alarm clock, a little bit. But there's so much more than that. So they can help you get to sleep by setting the mood in the room, both from like a lighting and a audio standpoint, and then they can help keep you asleep with white noise or whatever sounds you want.
Yes.
Maybe people like rain sounds or whatever it is, and then they can help you wake up in a way that is not so jarring to your system as the annoying beep, 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 by sort of gradually allowing you to hatch, I guess.
That's right.
You can change the light in the room gradually so that it's kind of waking you up that way. They can change the sounds a little bit.
You can customize sort of your routine for going to sleep, which is helpful.
Yeah.
And also your routine for
waking up.
Yeah.
So Hatch is offering our listeners $20 off their purchase of the Hatch Restore, and you get free shipping. You go to hatch.co/Gleeman. That's HATCH.co/Gleeman to get $20 off and free shipping. Hatch.co/Gleeman.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk a little hitting here. So
this is the side I'm even more excited about. I know that one was ranked 6th, the one was ranked 2nd. I don't care. I'm excited to see
call
this lineup.
BS on the projections. It's fine. I won't be offended.
That's right.
I am not affiliated with any organization that produces projections anymore.
Yeah.
So
The Athletic doesn't do that anymore?
I don't think so. Well, maybe we do fantasy projections. I don't know. But it was an interesting time in my life when I had to answer for Pacoda.
Right.
And they wouldn't really let me even peek behind the curtain that much. They let me peek, but they wouldn't let me tinker.
Right.
And so every year, Baseball Prospectus would put out, I think I was there, 3 years, 4 years, something like that, as editor-in-chief, which means you're the guy who has to answer for stuff.
Right, that's right.
And they'd post the projections, and then, some fan base would be furious. And the weird part to me each year was there would always be a fan base that was angry that the projections were too good for that group. Because there would always be a fan base, for instance, Twins fans right now, who are if there's a group that's furious about the payroll situation, and then Pacoda goes, they're 80% to win the division.
Right.
And then fans are like, how dare they say that? Don't they realize?
I think one year that was Twins fans.
Yes.
Because they'd come out of the previous year with like 58 wins or something like that, had one of their worst years ever. And it came out with Pacoda with something like, they're a 78-win team.
I remember arguing with Lavelle about this.
Exactly, yeah.
Lavelle was like, how is this possible? And I'm like, I don't know. You want to bet on it? But I don't know. It's kind of like with prospects too, where people get all worked up. I put out a top 40 list every year, and then people get all worked up. Like, how can you rank this guy 4th? Baseball America had him ranked 3rd.
Right.
It's like, well, that's nothing. That's not anything.
Right. Yeah.
What's the difference between being ranked 6th offensively and being ranked 5th or 4th or 3rd? Like, what is the level at which someone would go, that makes sense? And often it's 5 runs over the course of a season on a projection side because everything is sort of regressed towards the middle anyway, obviously. But
by the way, that year that happened, I'm almost sure they made the wild card that year.
Yes. Well,
that was 2017.
Pretty sure Lavelle deleted his tweet because his tweet was something like, this is insane. Like, the computers are taking over the whatever. And I'm like, oh, okay. Okay. So here's the thing about projection systems. I don't know why this occurred to me. I saw Dan Zimborski, who's my first ever editor I had 20 years ago. And now he's been at ESPN. He's now at Fangraphs, and he does Zips projections. The Z in Zips is from Zimborski.
Okay, yeah.
He posted because somebody was like, projections are bullshit, whatever. They don't. Why does anybody care? And he goes, well, here's how projections have done team-wide against Las Vegas over-unders for the last 20 years. Because one thing about Dan, and really I would probably guess anybody who produces projections, they're going to have the data. They're going to have a spreadsheet and more.
In God we trust. Dan brings the data.
And he had, I think, 57% or 58%, which, by the way, if you're a gambler, you can make a living at 58%.
Of course.
And then from an individual perspective, it's similar. So that's why we talk about projections, basically.
Sure.
But with that said, projections can be good and bad relative to the a fan base or media members' knowledge of a particular team. because you, like you said earlier, don't necessarily see forest through trees.
Right.
And that can be good and that can be bad.
Right.
It can be good in the sense that I would like to think that you and I, and probably anybody listening to this, has enough sort of additional knowledge about the Minnesota Twins, whether as a collective unit or individual players, that they could look at any projection of a team or a roster or a player or whatever and say, well, this is going to be off, or that's going to be off, or this guy's never going to throw that many innings, or they're underrating this guy's power and everything. And we like to think, because this is how the human brain works, that that will be a net result positive. In other words, intimate knowledge or in-depth knowledge of something will allow you to sort of outperform a computer algorithm that just looks at it as numbers. But the downside to that is it can work the other way too.
Sure, right.
Which is you can talk yourself, whether good or bad, into saying, like, into going with narratives, or even just in your head dismissing a projection. And I've done this too.
Of course.
For sure.
Yeah, for
Where
sure. The last episode we did was an over-under episode.
Right.
We totally are talking ourselves into various narratives.
Individual players where I'll go, well, that's way off. This guy's added power. And then at the end of the year, you go, you know what?
Yeah.
There was a reason. So what I often will do with projections is you use them to try to, kind of push you back. If you've gone too far one way or the other way on a team or a player, and the projection is much different from that, it's not that you're right or they're wrong, but like I'll use Eddie Julian this year for an example. I've bought all the stock in Eddie Julian for the past 3 years, and it's starting to pay off. But I saw Fangraphs projects him to be a very good player with a 360 on base percentage and all that, but it projects him very little power. And so me personally, having watched him and written about him for 3 years and talked to him about his aggressive swing and all this stuff, I'm convinced that he can hit 20 homers a year and he's going to slug, 450.
Right.
Well, I look at Fangraphs projections and I go, well, it's like a 390 slugging percentage. In my head, I go, well, he's going to beat that easily. And my reaction once upon a time might have been, well, they're wrong about that. Right. Now my reaction to that is, okay, well, put that in the back of your mind about Ed Julian so that there's maybe more reason to be skeptical, or there's more reason statistically to at least leave open that possibility. And so if it's June 1st and he's only got 2 homers, don't be shocked by that, because there might be some validity behind
it. When the Zips projections came out a month and a half ago, something like that, on the players, you and I talked about potentially. We never actually made this episode. We had too much other stuff going on, too many signings and stuff. But we talked about doing a Patreon episode where we talked about the Zips. So we took a look. Both of us took a pretty strong look at the Zips. And what you find out on that is, it's good news for all those veterans that were hurt last year.
Yes.
The Zips projections are very kind to them. All those rookies that did way more than we thought they were going to do, the Zips projections are not very kind to them at all.
Regression,
that's right.
Well, it sounds like it's a word that's dragging things down.
Right, yes.
It can also mean essentially progression. Right. So, if the league hits 250 as a batting average and you hit 150, regression can mean naturally kind of raising that 150 towards the league average. But it can also mean if you hit 350, it's going to drag it down towards the league average. So, to your point, you look at like Wallner or Julian or guys like that, and it's like, well, why would the projection system...
He's only 24 years old.
Yeah, of course he's going to be better.
Yeah, right.
Maybe. But all the projection system is doing is saying, what is the 100-year history of 24-year-olds?
Yeah, right.
And to the flip side, you go, well, Buxton's always hurt. Correa's coming off his worst year. Now they're a year older. Why would they ever be expected to be better? Well, because
Correa was really good 2 years ago.
Exactly.
He just had a bad year last.
So the one thing that stands out to me about this lineup is, if healthy, which is a big caveat, although hopefully less so with the rotation, but maybe not with this team, they have the potential to have an average or better hitter at all 9 lineup spots.
Yeah, they do, and they also seem to have that. We've talked about that with other Twins teams, where what they seem to bring is the depth 1 through 9. But a lot of times with those same teams, we were like, but they don't really have the middle of the order that you are like.
This team also has that.
This team also has
if
that.
Healthy,
right?
I mean, the idea of Correa, Buxton, Lewis,
right,
and I'll throw in Julian for that matter, and then even some of the secondary guys. I mean, look,
Kirilloff, Santana, Max Kepler, right,
and if Jeffers
Wallner,
can come anywhere close to repeating last year, I mean,
right.
It's just potentially 1 through 9 a really, really good lineup, both in terms of there's no I don't want to be mean, but there's no Matt Tolbert spot in the lineup, or no Williams Astudillo, or there's no spot where you go, oh, I hope he doesn't bat with guys on.
Right.
There's going to be guys who are less dependable and less optimism surrounding them.
Guys who go through slumps or aren't what we thought.
But
we thought they were.
There's very few guys in this lineup that wouldn't be a reasonable number 5 hitter, or couldn't bat at the top of the lineup in certain matchups. Right. And there's tons of guys of the projected starting 9 that somebody's going to have to bat 7, 8, 9. And they're going to be undeserving of that.
Right.
Ryan Jeffers is going to bat 8th or 9th sometimes off a season where he led American League catchers in OPS.
Yeah, we had a 130 OPS plus.
Right. Or, Kirilloff's going to bat 8th or 9th. Right. And you're going to go, well, that's ridiculous if he's healthy. But that's a strength, obviously. But yeah, I think the mix of that plus the star power that we've seen and you would project from some of these guys has a chance to, I would bet on it being a top 5 lineup. I think that's this is more an NBA line of thinking where it's like, to be a championship contender, you need to be a top 10 offense and a top 10 defense, which is why there's skepticism around the Wolves right now. Yeah. The Wolves have the number 1 defense all season, and I think they're 18th in offensive efficiency. And it's like the list of teams that have even made the finals or even made a deep playoff run, ranking 18th in either offense or defense is pretty minimal. Now, baseball isn't quite the same, but if you're looking at it in a 15-team league, the American League, if you can be a top 5 on both sides of the ball, you're going to be a World Series contender. And I think that is definitely, within reason for the Twins. And I don't know what I would. It sounds like you would bet on, if I just said, will the Twins runs scored or runs allowed rank better within the American League?
I would think runs scored.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, that's a big change from last year.
No, you're right.
They were second best in runs allowed last year and 9th overall in runs scored, something like that, I want to say. So that would be a big change. I don't necessarily disagree with you. I think it's probably a coin flip in my head.
I mean, they were second and probably runs scored in the second half of the season.
To Houston was the only team that was better.
And, I mean, they've definitely taken a step backwards in the rotation.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Also, the regression aspect is there, too, team-wide.
That's right.
Which is if you finish second, you would expect some regression negatively. Yeah. And if you finish 9th, you would just expect some regression positively. But okay, so let's talk about a few more lineup-based things. The other thing, it's great to have 9 guys who can all be average or better. But we know, similar to the discussion with the bullpen or the rotation, those guys aren't going to all get 600 at bats. Right. I mean, first of all, Jeffers is going to split time with Vasquez.
Right, exactly.
Second of all, Julian is going to sit versus a lot of lefties, and Farmer's going to take over. Right. And Wallner's going to sit against lefties, and Margot's going to take over. And we know that Byron Buxton's going to miss games. And we know, it's great to have 9 guys that you count on, but you need 13 or 18 probably guys that you can count on. Right. But that is part of what stands out to me also, which I'm not going to sit here and say that the Twins have the best farm system in the world. They have, I would say, in my mind, a slightly above average farm system. I've seen rankings that put them somewhere between 12th and 18th in the majors, something like that. I think that's fair. But I think much like we saw last year, they were not projected as a top 5 farm system last year, and they got a historic production from the rookie trio of Lewis, Julian, and Wallner. You're never going to repeat that. But similarly this year, is their overall farm system top 5? No. But they got Brooks Lee on the doorstep of the majors. Right. They got Austin Martin ready to at least be a utility guy. They got David Festa, who we just talked about. And then they have some secondary guys, Funderburk in their rotation, Simeon Woods Richardson.
Or some guys that who've seen up here before, and they've
that's one of the keys.
You also got Larnick and you got Miranda, who are looking to bounce back from miserable seasons.
Who are sort of post-hype prospects, I would say. And so that, to me, I think they have very good depth 1 through 9 with some star power. I think the bench of Vasquez, Farmer, Castro, Margot is very good relative to benches, and also has actual utility that can be used. Like we said, Vasquez.
They've got the right tools. They're good fits for what they've got.
It's not just a bunch of lefty bats or something like that. And then beyond that, I think the ability to have at AAA, waiting in the wings, Brooks Lee, Austin Martin, Jair Camargo as a catcher, Trevor Larnach, and Jose Miranda as sort of corner outfield first base. You got Brooks Lee who can play anywhere in the infield.
Right.
You got Austin Martin who can play second or all over the
It's
outfield.
going to be fun going to some St. Paul games early this year.
It definitely was fun for people last year. I
Right.
know. And so I would say that their depth is strong, not just on the bench, but particularly if you can make it into like June without having to really dip into the minors. They got some guys who can come up and make a real impact. Not like they got last year. I mean, you might go 50 years before you see a rookie trio hit like that. Right. But that to me is the strength of the lineup is just there aren't a lot of guys, barring this injury situation from a few years ago where just everybody got hurt.
That's right.
There aren't a lot of guys who project to get any sort of significant plate appearances for the Twins this year who just can't hit or can't play. Yeah, and that's rare.
The minor league system for the Twins might not be, top 5, top 10. But what they do have, their strength is most of their really good players are at AA or AAA.
Right. And even Emmanuel Rodriguez, who just turned 21, and I would not expect to make an impact this year, he's starting the year at AA.
Right.
And he's a top 100 prospect, and he's supremely talented. Right. If he can get to AAA by the second half of the season, like I like to say, you can kind of choose your own adventure at that point.
That's right.
So that is the strength of the team. So someone asked us a question the last mailbag we did on the Patreon, which we do a mailbag almost every week.
Yeah, I'm sure we're going to do one next week.
Yes. So if you sign up for the Patreon, you get an exclusive email where you can ask mailbag questions. Somebody said they said an over-under of 340 games for the trio of Correa, Buxton, and Lewis. Right. And they asked, would we sort of take that? Right. And the more I've thought about it, I would absolutely take that.
Sure.
And I would feel so confident that they would win the division if they hit the over on that.
Okay.
And I'm so confident that I think a more reasonable over-under might be 300, which is 100 games each. And you might say, well, they're each missing over a third of the season. Yeah. There's so many worse outcomes of that trio than that. And so that, to me, we can talk all we want about all these storylines and stuff. It's a lot of it just comes down to, are those guys mostly healthy or mostly injured?
Yeah, right.
Because those are their three best players, other than Pablo Lopez. But those are their three best position players. Right. And they're also three of the best position players, theoretically, upside-wise, in the league. Right. And if you get 400 games from those guys, you will stroll to a division title. Yeah, and if you get 200 games from those guys, you might be in trouble. And so much of the season just comes down to, is Correa going to be the pre-heel injury version? Is all the optimism about Byron Buxton meaningful at all? And is Lewis still an injury risk because of the ACLs, or is he sort of past that and now we can just look at him as a fully grown just star player?
I think I would modify that a little bit in that I would say I would feel very confident with them winning the division if they reach those numbers.
Yeah.
I don't feel that unconfident about them winning the division if they don't. Do you know what I mean?
Well, they won it last year.
Yeah, right.
They got, what'd they get? Well, Correa played 135.
Well, that's right.
Buxton played about 70.
Maybe.
And Lewis played 70.
I've got it right here.
So they got fewer than 300 games for sure.
That's right.
From that trio.
Yeah, we had Royce Lewis at 58.
58, right.
Buxton at 85. Okay. So that's 143. Plus Carlos Correa, that's 278.
Was he 135 or am I off on that?
135 was right on. 278 total.
So and they won the division.
And they won the division.
And by the way, but here's the other thing.
I'm saying that because of the depth we just talked about.
I agree, but here's the other thing within that, which goes even further to your point. Correa wasn't good.
That's right. Yeah,
Buxton wasn't especially good.
No,
now, Royce Lewis was out of his mind.
Well, that's true.
So,
that's
true.
It
makes up for it. Right. But that was 277 games?
278.
278 games of two-thirds of those were not that good.
Right, yeah.
And so to get 300 where they're just sort of their normal selves, or what we hope is their normal selves, would just make such a huge impact. And by the way, defensively too would make a huge impact. I mean, the difference offensively, we talk about the firepower that those guys have. They could be realistically could be your three best hitters. Absolutely could be your three best hitters. But also they're your shortstop, center fielder, and third baseman who used to be a shortstop. Right. The difference between those guys and their backups defensively might be, I don't want to get preposterous statement tournament, but it's not that far off from the difference between them and their backups offensively. I mean, think of who the backup shortstop is. It's probably Kyle Farmer. God love Kyle Farmer.
Right.
But he ain't Carlos Correa. Manuel Margot can play center field, but he cannot play center field like a healthy Byron Buxton.
Right.
And, third base might end up being Brooks Lee, so who knows. But it'd be Castro maybe or some Farmer.
Right.
And I think Royce Lewis has a chance to be solidly better than those guys too. So it's huge. And part of me thinks that that's reason to worry because Royce Lewis has never been healthy, basically. Yeah. Byron Buxton has very rarely been healthy, and Correa's coming off a year where he had a 5-month injury. Right. But part of me also thinks it's reason to be optimistic because it's just 3 guys, and they all do have a track record of greatness. Right. So I don't know. It goes towards the sort of push and pull of this team where it's like you can talk yourself into either thing, I think, with this team, either side of the ledger a lot of the time with this team. Let's see, a few more things on the lineup side. We talked about Lewis, Julian, and Wallner just have to do it as sophomores. You have to prove it.
Yeah.
I mean, the odds of any of them, let alone all 3 of them, duplicating on a per-game rate basis their performance as rookies, it ain't happening.
No.
I mean, if they do, they're going to be 3 of the best hitters in Twins history.
Right.
So you're going to expect some coming back down to earth a little bit. Right. But you're also going to get...
Yeah, that much I trust on the projections for those 3. Right? Yeah,
I mean, Look, if Royce Lewis plays 100-something games a year and hits like he did as a rookie, he'll be first ballot Hall of Fame. So, I mean, that's an expectation that is a little bit tricky. But you're also going to get significantly more games, hopefully, from that trio. I mean, I think Julian led that trio and he played about 105 games. Wallner obviously played less than half the season, and you just said Royce Lewis played 58 games or whatever it was.
Julian had 109.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, yeah, that's
part of it, too. You're going to expect more quantity and less quality from that trio. Yeah. And I guess just overall. You mentioned Miranda, he's at AAA. He's going to be at AAA. The goal with Miranda, obviously, is you got to show you're healthy again.
Yeah, right.
And the only way to do that is just hit. He's got to show his shoulder is fine. He's got to show that the promise he displayed as a rookie is legit, and he can't be a guy that can be sort of pitched to, and his lack of plate discipline can't be taken advantage of. In addition to the injury question marks, and he could prove to be very big. First of all, as a right-handed bat, even if it's only in a platoon situation mid-season, but also, where are the biggest question marks? Well, one of them's the 38-year-old first baseman.
Yeah.
Because he hasn't been that great the past few years. He's been sort of average-ish. Yeah. And he's 38, so that's even going to end at some point. And then the other one is the 3-time surgery recipient DH/first baseman in Kirilloff.
Yep. Sure.
And so if he's hurt again and or Santana shows his age, you're going to need Jose Miranda or somebody, Junior Severino or somebody, to step up. And those are the 2 spots where the bar for offense is the highest.
I'd actually put Larnach as a potential wild card in that scenario as well. And also add this about both Larnach and Miranda. They both have an open spot in 2025. Right. They both have a guy playing in front of them that is not going to be here.
But only if they do something in 2024.
Well, that's what my point is. That even if they don't make a contribution this year in the major leagues, they need to show enough at AAA this year so that you can go, well, they might be at least part of the solution next year, 2025.
Larnach will be out of options next year. I don't 100% know what Miranda's status will be. But, I mean, Larnach will be damn near 30 at that point. So there's going to be a sink or swim element of this. So I agree with that for sure. So they are sort of under the radar. Here are just some questions I have about the lineup to finish up here. Or the hitting group, however you want to term it.
Sure.
Number 1, and I've been asking this for 3 years. Will the lack of a right-handed hitting slugger for the outfield hurt them? Yeah. Just sort of limit their flexibility.
JD Martinez just signed for 1 year, $12 million.
Yeah, he's not an outfielder, but yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's right. But it's like, they tried to put Jordan Luplow in that role last year, and it didn't really work. They've tried other guys in that role. They chose Margot over a Duvall or a Tommy Pham type because he can handle center field, and that's fine with me. But there are going to be some days when it's like there's a lefty on the mound. Right. We're going to bench, Kirilloff or Wallner or even Kepler. And we'd really just like some guy who can destroy left-handed pitching. And they don't really have that in the outfield. True.
And they don't really even have it even sitting in AAA right now. Like the right-handed options that would come up to help with it. Austin Martin's a nifty player and that he might be an interesting addition to this lineup.
But he's certainly not a slugger.
No, he's not a slugger.
And Miranda has the potential to be that type of hitter, but he can't really play the outfield.
Right.
So I wonder about that. Will they? It is interesting to look at the roster and the payroll situation and their inability to kind of sign a Lorenzen type late in the game.
Sure.
And say, well, yeah, it's about $30 million getting slashed off the payroll. But I will also point out they are essentially spending $20 million on the trio of Vasquez, who's the backup catcher,
right?
Farmer, who's the utility infielder, and Willie Castro,
right,
who's like just last man on the bench utility role. Yeah. And if you have a higher payroll, I mean, that's not crazy. Obviously, Vasquez is, a negative value contract at this point, but $5 or $6 million for Farmer and $3 million for Castro. There are definitely teams that would not go nuts against that. But it is a weird, I don't know, dichotomy, is that the right word? Where it's like, oh yeah, they don't have money to do much. They're paying their backup catcher $10 million.
Right.
They're paying their backup shortstop $6.5 million, and they're paying Willie Castro, who doesn't even really have a role, although we've certainly seen the impact he can make, $3.5 million.
Yeah.
Well, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
I don't think they were assuming it would be quite as much a percentage of their payroll as it is now, because they've lost 20% of their payroll.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I think they thought. I mean, obviously the Vasquez deal has not worked out as well. I mean, a lot of this is somewhat bad decisions, right? So, or I'm not even saying necessarily a bad decision, but just a decision that hasn't worked out as well as they wanted.
Yeah, I mean, I will forever be fascinated by the Kyle Farmer decision, and Kyle Farmer will even say as much.
Yeah, right, yes.
I didn't think I'd be here either.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
It's a lot of money to pay for sort of a part-time guy. On the other hand, if one of the infielders gets hurt, or he just does his thing against lefties really well in a platoon with Ed Julian,
sure,
$6 million can be a bargain.
That's
too.
Fine. Yeah, that's fine. And it allows somebody like Brooks Lee to stay down,
right?
Down
That's
there,
true.
or Martin to stay down.
We talked about Santana. My big question with him. At some point we talked about this with Nelson Cruz back in the day. At some point, a guy just stops being good. And he's trended towards that. I mean, he's much less good than he was 5 or 8 years ago with the Guardians.
Yep.
But he's been an average-ish hitter overall the past couple of years.
Last year, he kind of had a surge a little bit.
Still got 20 homer power, still draws a ton of walks, and is a good defender at first base. I mean, they really seem to believe in his defense at first base. But is he a guy you want to be playing every day against lefties and righties? I don't know. They like the switch hitting component.
Sure.
But you're going to need production out of that spot and the DH spot. And I think that's going to be a part of it.
The answer is going to be apparent when you see where he bats in the lineup versus righties versus where he bats in that lineup versus lefties.
It sounds like he's going to lead off against lefties.
Right.
I'm not entirely convinced that he's not going to be near the top against righties a lot. Too.
Really?
Yeah. Just because switch hitter, draws walks.
Yeah.
This is not what I would do.
No, right. Yes.
First of all, I don't think I would even have him in the lineup against a lot of righties, let alone at the top of the lineup. But I'm not entirely convinced. I think they seem to really, and maybe this is just the deference paid to a very well-respected 38-year-old veteran.
Or maybe.
Where you just take every opportunity to talk him up and talk about his strengths and not his weaknesses and all that. But the level of hype or praise that they've heaped on Santana defensively, the switch hitting component, even though he hasn't really been that effective as a left-handed hitter for several years, and just sort of the quality of that bat that he takes, which is definitely still true.
Right.
It does lead me to think. I mean, we found out right away, he ain't coming in to fill a platoon role. He's going to play every day. Right. And now I'm starting to get a little that he's going to bat a lot higher than people would hope. Against righties. I have no problem with him leading off against lefties, at least initially.
I'll be surprised if we see him more than a handful of times batting higher than 6.
I'll text you every time I'll set up an automated text every time.
There you go.
Let's see. Kirilloff, we talked about, he's having a great spring.
Yeah,
he's hitting for power. He's hitting for average. Can he just stay healthy?
I mean, come on, wrist. Hang in there.
Shoulder, too, maybe.
Maybe, yeah.
Because I feel like, and this is natural when there's been so many injuries year after year and such significant injuries. It's natural to just be like, well, it's the 4th year of it, right? I mean, like, how you can't continue to drive the bandwagon.
Right.
And so he becomes sort of an afterthought.
But at some point, maybe the stuff actually gets fixed.
But if healthy,
right.
We've seen it in flashes for a month at a time or 3 weeks at a time, year after year. he ain't an 8-9 hitter.
Right. Yeah.
He's either a 3 hitter or should be on the IL.
That's right.
Those are
That's
the
right.
two versions
Yes,
of
that's
him
right.
that you basically get.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm almost to the point that I think last year I was very skeptical of him, relatively speaking, and I still have that skepticism, but I feel like everyone is so skeptical of him now
Right,
that
yeah.
I'm almost to the point that I'm like, is this a depressed value? Like,
depressed asset.
can you almost
right.
like buy stock
That's
in
right.
Kirilov?
Yeah.
Just
Undervalued
because,
asset.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And then the last thing, we talked about Jeffers a little bit. I was going to mention him, but then we haven't talked that much. We can finish on this. Why not? This might be our last season preview in which we can talk about Max Kepler,
Yeah. Right.
an impending free agent. I believe in his 15th season in the Minnesota Twins organization, either 14th or 15th.
That sounds right.
He's lost his fellow longest tenured twin in Jorge Polanco, who was his great friend. What struck me about Kepler, well, first of all, he had a great second half. Just a legitimately, almost like certainly an all-star caliber, like an MVP level second half. Huge for them.
Right.
And it came after 2.5 seasons, a first half that wasn't any good, following 2 seasons that weren't any good. Yeah. And anybody who listens to this knows that have not been the biggest Max Kepler supporter on the field. I have no problem with him off the field. Sure. I've thought that they should have pursued trades for him almost every offseason. But he was fantastic. He was just undeniably great in the second half. And what struck me about him during the couple weeks I was down there this spring, he's always in great shape.
Sure.
I mean, it's never an issue with like how does he look or how does he seem or how smooth is the swing? Can he run? You watch him. I always say if there were no statistics kept in baseball, you would watch Max Kepler and you could talk yourself into him being a Hall of Famer.
Sure.
Because he looks good in uniform.
That's right.
But what struck me about him this year, talking to him and talking to people about him, was that it's cliche. You hit 30,
Right.
free agency's around the corner.
Yeah, that's right.
You start to think about, I've been in this organization since I was literally 16 years old coming over from Germany.
Yeah.
I grew up here. And now I'm an adult, and it's cliche, but I really got the vibe that something has clicked for him or maybe clicked for him last season, personally and professionally, where it's like he's starting to talk about starting families and having kids, and he's got a long-term girlfriend now, and all that stuff that shouldn't matter, and maybe it doesn't.
Yeah, right.
But I do think it jibes with what we've seen in the second half on the field, which is maybe some stuff that didn't get through to him previously as a player or a person has gotten through to him now, in the sense that adjustments you can make or tweaks you can make or just
Or don't be afraid to strike out.
don't be afraid to strike out. Right.
Right. I mean, that's
Or maybe they've always pushed him, you're fast. Be a little bit more aggressive on the bases.
Right.
He hates to make outs on the bases. He's very conservative, which I guess is sort of a German thing maybe.
perhaps.
I don't know. I hesitate to start to give my thoughts on the Germans overall because we can go down to a dark place on that. But although I got one living with me, so I don't know how that goes.
Well.
It's not Max Kepler, by the way. He turned down my invite to be my roommate this year.
There's still time.
So I feel like it's true. We have a second bedroom. It's an office, but there's a couch. You could, yeah. Do you like cats? What are your thoughts on? They're super annoying cats. Does that help? No. Imagine one day I just like bonus is like we doing 9 a.m. tomorrow. Yep, Wednesday. I just I walk in the door with Max Kepler.
Sure. Okay.
Just both in our
be great.
sweatpants. Yeah. We're
I think
roomies.
that'd be a Patreon episode.
Yeah. Patreon with Aaron's new roommate, Matt. I don't know why I'm doing. Why I'm talking about. Because now somebody from the Twins is going to hear this. They're going to be like, what is he? What? We need to get a restraining order on Gleeman.
Shacking up with you, Kepler.
Well, not shacking up. Let's not say that. No, Becky will still be there. Believe me, she'd be thrilled Max Kepler moved in.
Of course.
Believe me.
Yeah.
Like once a year, she walks by the TV and she goes, who's that? And I'm always like, it's the same guy as last year, Max Kepler. Oh, okay. Anyway. Not since she saw Brad Ausmus as she had the reaction to that. But my point with Max Kepler, I start to get punchy at the end of these shows.
You do, yes.
He's sort of an afterthought too.
Right, yeah.
And I don't necessarily know that it should be
And
that
he's
case.
probably the afterthought that's going to be batting right in between all the three guys we talked about.
That's the other thing.
At some point here, he's going to be some left-handed hitter.
Well, that's why I was
has to end up
sort of-
being a linchpin in the middle of this thing. And
Because
it
we
might
know-
be Kirilov. Maybe it can end up being Kirilov. But right now, it's going to be Max Kepler.
Well, that was part of my thinking with the discussion we just had about Santana.
Well, that's
who's
true.
a switch hitter. There's a left hand. See, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
We know a couple things about how Baldelli likes to build lineups, and I don't disagree with any element of this, but he feels very strongly, or I believe he feels very strongly, about avoiding stacking the same handedness.
You don't want three guys in a row.
Right. You don't want three lefties in a row because then, even if you're facing a righty, you stack three lefties at 2-3-4 or 1-2-3. Come the sixth inning, or the fourth inning.
Or at least not three guys that you can't stack three guys in the same hands that aren't a natural platoon.
Right.
A platoon player, right.
And so what you don't want in that scenario is, well, then they just bring in a lefty reliever. We actually saw this quite a bit last year. The Tigers did this a couple of times.
Yeah.
Where they just bring in a lefty and he just blow through the lineup because it's all lefties.
Yeah.
Or you force Baldelli to make in-game moves, which he's not afraid of, but he would like to avoid. Well, it's the same thing with righties. I mean, we just talked about the trio of Correa, Buxton, Lewis. Those might be their three best hitters. Well, you could just bat them like 2-3-4. Bat Julian first, and even against righties, bat them 2-3-4. I have no problem with that. But it's like, well, I'm assuming Baldelli will want a lefty.
Yes, that's right.
And maybe at midseason, God willing, and the creek don't rise, it'll be Alex Kirilloff.
Right. Yeah. Right.
And maybe next season, it'll be Emmanuel Rodriguez. Right. And on and on. But right now,
in April, it's going to be Max.
It's probably going to be Max Kepler.
Right. That's right.
And the question I have is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, I mean, here's the thing: it was a terrible thing in first
Until
half
about
of last
July,
year. And then in July, it was
amazing.
It was amazing, right? Yeah, 926 OPS or something the second half of the season.
Big power, good plate discipline, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And so he's huge too. And that's part of the depth we talked about at the very beginning. We'll circle back to that as we end here. But the idea that someone like Kirilloff or someone like Kepler, or for that matter, Jeffers, who literally just led his position in OPS last year, can be an afterthought, relatively speaking, in a lineup and may end up batting a couple of those guys near the bottom of the lineup or at the bottom of the lineup. Well, that tells you the lineup is potentially really good. Right. It's not a scenario, and believe me, we went through this sometimes under Gardenhire, where it's like this guy should be batting higher. It's not even, maybe argue Kirilloff or whatever, but it's like it's not even about that. There's not a bad guy batting ahead of them because there isn't a bad guy necessarily. Right. And so I think that is.
And that becomes especially apparent when you compare it to, let's say, the rest of the AL Central. With somebody with like, hold it, you've got Ryan Jeffers batting where? Like, where would Kansas City be batting Ryan Jeffers?
Exactly.
Right?
I mean, where would Cleveland be batting Ryan Jeffers for that matter?
Yeah, right.
So, I think that's at least relevant and probably worthwhile to kind of think about the rotation, about the bullpen, and as we just talked about the lineup. So, do we want to end on a specific prediction of sorts?
Oh, yeah, we already did the over-under.
We did the over-under.
Do you want to do like who we think is going to – we often do
we're going to do that on Monday on the Patreon side. Okay. Patreon, patreon.com.
We got to come up with our preseason MVPs? Okay.
All right. Top 5 or maybe 10, whatever.
I like that.
And then we can compare how wrong we were.
Yeah. Okay.
Which will be wrong, I'm sure.
Next week Patreon will probably be doing one reaction to the final roster spots because now we got some questions about what's going to be some stuff, right? So we'll probably have one on that, and then we're probably also going to have a mailbag where
sort of your final questions before the thing gets rolling.
We give you an inbox that you can email your questions to, and then you can listen to the answers on the Patreon.
And then we will also probably have a Friday Patreon, Friday morning.
Yeah, right.
Honestly, we could do one Thursday night because it's a day game. We'll see how quick I'm done. But
although
you'll be coming back.
I'll be coming to Forgotten Star.
You'll be sleeping under a table.
I think you should. I think you should come to Forgotten Star. We should record.
Even Friday morning might be kind of iffy. It sounds like
potentially.
So I have to go. John's at the detox unit. I'll bring the microphone and the equipment to the drunk tank. Are you here to bail him out? No, you can leave him here. I just need to record something with him. While
you put the mic through the bars there.
That would be good. You hear the clang of the. That's a good sound effect, honestly. You don't hear many baseball podcasts recorded from jail.
No,
unless Trevor Bauer's doing one. Okay. I don't know. Do we want to? We both. So their over under is 85. I've seen it a couple different ways, but 85.5 I think is the most common over under for them. We've both gone on record on the last episode as taking the over.
Right.
But there's a lot of difference between 86 and 106.
Yeah, right.
I think we both expect them to win the division, obviously, if we're taking the over on that. Here, I will ask you to make 2 predictions. 3, you know what?
I'm trying to remember what I put down as my guess on how many wins they would have last week.
I'm going to give you 3 things that we should predict here to end on.
Okay.
Okay. Let's each take an exact win
Sure.
total for the Twins. Let's say how many games we think they will win the division by.
Okay.
And let's say who we think will finish in second place in the American League Central.
Okay.
I'll give you 4 seconds to think about that
Okay.
while I vamp here, which I like to do.
I'll
with
start with
John.
the end. It'll be Cleveland will be second.
Okay.
Cleveland will have 83 wins.
Okay. You've got more
And
specific
the
than I was requesting.
Twins will have 90 wins, so that'll be a 7-game difference. So I say
Okay.
97 and Cleveland. The answer.
All right. You've okay.
Okay. What do you got?
I need to think about it, John. I'll get back to you tomorrow. So last night I said to Becky.
No way you did that. But
No.
that's all right.
Last night I said to Becky, the biggest challenge of being a 40-year-old couple
Yeah.
is deciding what to have for dinner every night, particularly when you get a lot of stuff delivered or you go takeout. And I said to her, it was like 4 o'clock, and I said, I'm going to take a shower. I didn't shower this morning. I was busy. I said, by the time I get out of the shower, think of something good we can get for dinner that I can go pick up or whatever. And she said, okay. And I got out of the shower, and I said, did you think of it yet? And she looked at me, and she said, did I think of what yet? What have you been doing for the last 20 minutes? And she said, not thinking of whatever you want me to be thinking about. So that's me with these.
That's perfect. Yeah.
I like to bury these relationship tidbits an hour and 30 minutes.
That's right. You'll never make it this
No,
far.
and no one she knows will make it through this far.
Right.
No. I will say, what did you say, 90?
90.
Boy, you might be a little higher than me. I will say 80. What did they win last year? 87?
Uh-huh.
I say 88 wins,
Okay.
just so I can say they were better than last
Sure.
year. I guess I'll say Cleveland finishes second,
Okay.
and I will say Cleveland finishes. What did you say they'd finish with?
83.
See, I don't want to say that. I'll say Cleveland finishes 81 and 81.
Okay.
So there's
So you
7
also
games.
7. Yeah, so we matched on the 7.
Ooh, that's interesting.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so you're saying 90 wins for the Twins. I'm saying 88 wins for the Twins.
Right.
You're saying they will win the division by 7 games over the Cleveland Guardians. And I am saying, I'm going to say it in a slightly different way, they will win the division by 7.0 games over the Guardians from Cleveland.
That's
See, I
right.
said it completely
Yeah,
different.
it's totally different. Yeah.
Boy, this is sickening because has anybody listened to the Over Under show?
Yeah, I know.
We had the same brain for
Yeah.
almost every team.
I know.
I don't like that, John.
I think
Because I don't like it.
my theory on that is that it's not that we necessarily. I think that we've got the similar betting strategy now.
Well, I also just think we spend months and months and months talking about these teams
Sure.
and the Twins. And so we kind of have a sense of, I don't know, maybe we talk ourselves
Yeah, we
into the
probably
same
do.
beliefs.
Probably
do. Let's not do that anymore.
Okay.
Let's next year not talk for like 3 months and then do the Over-Under show.
I'm absolutely on board.
Yeah, I bet you are. Well, I'll be hanging out with my new roommate, Max Kepler, anyway, so who needs you? All right. Thank you to our sponsors here.
BetterHelp and Hatch and Soda Stick and RotoWire. I will see some of you Thursday at Forgotten Star next week. The rest of you
Sign up for the Patreon.
You will hear us.
You know you want to.
Yeah. If those 4,200 of you will hear us next on Monday. As
Yeah,
we
but it should be
go through some of
4,500.
these, right? Yeah, and then the rest of you will talk to you in about 2 weeks when I get back from various trips abroad, or various trips to Philadelphia. All right, bye-bye.
Gleeman